Okay. Alright, let's see if this thing will fire up. No. Battery voltage is too low. Awesome. While we wait for the battery to charge, I might as well go ahead and talk about this truck for anybody who doesn't know anything about it. This is the truck I had in high school, and it originally had the 350 Chevy in it, but the block had a crack in the side of it, and so we put some block sealer in it, and that worked for 5,000 miles, and then it sprung a leak again, and we started looking at engine options, and this was right around the time that Hostess went out of business. And so they started scrapping all of their delivery trucks, which conveniently had 4 BTs in them. And the junkyard down in Los Angeles that we got this from had 150 trucks. And they sold something like 120 engines in one day, which I think is just crazy. But we got it. We had to find a 46RH to put behind it. And it's been good ever since then. The only problem with it now is there's a ton of blow-by, and it smokes really badly. I'm going to school up in Washington, and to drive it back to California is a roughly 1,300 miles. And in that distance, it went through about 3.5 gallons of oil, which is kind of ridiculous. And if we go to the other side over here, right above the exhaust, it's all just soot, and most of it's actually oil too. It's very slimy. It's not like diesel soot where it just sort of is like powdery and then comes off really easily. But yeah, so we're gonna have to pull the engine out of this and see what's wrong with it, and then kind of figure out what to do with this truck, because hopefully the engine is savable. I'm really hoping it's just a broken piston ring, or it's slightly worn out and we can bore it 20 thousandths over or something. But the coolant was low too when I just checked it, so hopefully the head gasket didn't go because of something worse. I guess we'll see in a bit though. Alright, let's see how much pressure's in there. You think it's time for a rebuild?
It's like opening a 2-liter bottle of soda.
I think it's time for a rebuild for sure. What on your side? What difference is it make? We've already prepped to go back over here. are you doing?
Put on my coveralls. It's cold. I could easily fit that geometric convertible back here.
We're not buying a geometric convertible. It's not even cool.
I was wrong. I told you it was $750. It was like $595.
Wow. It's still a no from me.
You can drive that back to Washington.
On any account?
Sell it for a fortune.
No. I don't want to get into the Geo Metro cult. As cool as the Geo Metro is, it's really not fuel. It's not fuel efficient enough for me. I need more. All right. All right. Let's look at this. This has to exist, right?
Hey, it's ZZ Top. That wheel.
What? You know, they make these things called jack stands. Don't know if you heard of them.
Yeah. Round 5.
17 or 20, 23, 22.
Alright, ready? Oh, we do this in one shot?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's why you left all the screwdrivers here for me.
Yep. I gotta walk over them too. Nice, look at that.
Just put on the rock so we can wash it. Alright. What the heck? You parking under pine trees or something?
It's Washington!
What's all this crap here? There's no pine trees in Grammy's garage.
There's pine trees at school. There's pine trees at Evan's house. There's pine trees at Dominic's house. There's pine trees at McDonald's, okay? There's pine trees everywhere. There is no not parking under a pine tree. They're everywhere. I don't know if you heard this. It's called the Evergreen State. They said it for a reason. They didn't just make it up.
Are we rolling?
Are we rolling? Yes. We're rolling. Look at that. Alright, now we have to worry about the crossbar. Or not. Alright, now you're going up again. Okay. Alright, stop.
Well, here is the result of the full teardown of this engine, and it actually doesn't look too terribly bad. If we look at the main journal bearings, they're still pretty smooth, and it doesn't look like the crankshaft had been eating into any of the layers on that. Same thing with the cam bearing, very nice and smooth, no scarring, nothing like that. So those both look excellent. If we look down here, the crankshaft is still, again, also very smooth. So that is definitely in good shape and will be reused. And then when we come to the pistons, this is where we ran into a problem. So right about there's piston rings like this, and it sits right there. The problem with that is these piston rings are not supposed to be special two-piece quick-release piston rings. And so every single one of them on all the cylinders snapped right on that edge, because normally they would look like that. That would be what your normal piston ring would look like. It would be connected up there, and it would be one big piece. On all 4 of these cylinders, we took all of the piston rings out, at least the number 2 piston rings. The second one's down. We took all of them out in halves. The number 1 piston ring on here, this main one right here, is still in good shape, and all the oil skimming rings are still in, decent shape at least. So it was very interesting to see that only these specific piston rings had broken. Another thing I found was that the thermostat has like a rubber gasket on it almost, but it's been sucked in through the thermostat housing somehow, which is not something I've ever seen before. It's definitely an interesting and a new one. And if you shake it, it rattles. So I definitely think this was broken. This engine did run a little cool, so I'm thinking that must be the issue there. Then when we come over to the turbo, it doesn't look too bad until you look inside the compressor wheel and notice there's a bunch of oil. And then you take the clamp off, and the housing comes off, and there's nothing but oil everywhere. There's almost no shaft play, though. It doesn't move at all. The whole turbo's moving back and forth right now, but there's very little end shaft play and side-to-side shaft play. So that's very interesting. I think the compressor seal that sits behind the wheel is bad, and that is probably one of the reasons this engine was drinking so much oil when I drove it home about 6 months ago. I think the piston rings also contributed to that oil burn a little bit more than I would have liked, and the same thing with the blow-by. The last thing that I found inside this engine is if we look at all of the rod bearings, if you look right there, I don't know if you can tell, but it's worn through a layer. So it goes from silver to like a bronze coppery color, and then back to silver. And on all the pistons, it's in the exact same place of being right here, which is very interesting. I think that's from the up and down motion, and it's hitting specifically right here. If you look at the rest of it, it's not actually that bad. The rest of it still looks pretty good. So it's very interesting to see that they all wore in the exact same place. But I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, since this engine has, I don't know, maybe 500,000 miles on it. I don't really know. I pulled it out of a Twinkie truck, and there wasn't an odometer in there at the time, so there's no clues as to how many miles this engine originally had before I put it in my truck 4 years ago. But that's what it looks like right about now. The head, I don't know if you can see this, but it's kind of chunky. There's a lot of just carbon built up deposits on the head, and then the same thing with the fuel injectors here. There's just a nice big chunk of stuff right there, which I think is probably from the oil burn as well, but hey, who knows. And the rest of it looks pretty good. The valves still look like they're in decent shape. We'll have to see when we completely tear the head apart, but for right now it doesn't look too bad. Everything else is just sort of sitting around here, but it's turning out much better than I had expected it to be. I thought this was going to be way worse. I thought we were going to have to maybe sleeve the block or do something. The cam looks like it's in good shape. The lobes on the camshaft aren't even worn at all, or they're worn very little at the very tips of the lobes. So it's definitely a good cam. And then this transmission was a 46RH that was behind a 6BT originally, and the guy I bought it from had just rebuilt it before he sold it to me. I don't remember what the reasoning behind that was. Maybe he changed his mind, maybe he did a manual swap. I can't really remember right now. But that's in good shape. And then back here, I have a spare 6BT just in case, because more cylinders is always better, right? That engine only has 54,000 miles on it, I believe. And it came out of a crashed Ford F700 from the late 80s or the early 90s or something like that. But hopefully we won't have to put that engine in this truck. Hopefully this engine is still good, and it looks like it's still good, and we can throw it back into this engine bay over here, and it will be good to go. I have to go back to school now, which is in Washington, and I'm currently in California. And so this engine rebuild will have to wait another 3 months probably until spring break. But I will give you guys updates when we get back to then. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.